Okay, so are we good to go? Does everybody do this if we're good to go? Okay. All right. So we left off, we're going to talk about radiation physics today. And the first thing that we have to realize, and I want you to think about, is there are only 5 radio opacities that you can see, or 5 shades of gray, if you will, that you can see on radiographs. The most white thing that you can see is metal. The next kind of white thing that's a little darker than pure white is going to be bone or mineral, same thing. And then getting towards kind of a really nice shade of gray is soft tissue. And fat is almost black, but not totally black. And then something that's air is totally black. And of those 5 opacities, those are the only things that you can see on any radiograph. Okay, so that might come back to haunt you as a test question too at some point in time. So I would know those things. That will be useful to you going from here on out. The other thing I should tell you right away too is, what is the difference between a radiograph and an X-ray? Well, glad you asked. The radiograph is actually the real name that we call a picture that we used X-rays to make. Okay, the X-rays are the things that get produced, the electromagnetic radiation that we talked about yesterday, that go through the body and allow us to get the picture. Now, everybody calls radiographs X-rays. That's kind of the lay term for it. But in reality, if you want to sound like a real doctor, you should probably get in the habit of telling your clients and your associates that we're going to get radiographs instead of we're going to get X-rays. And we're going to look at the radiographs instead of we're going to look at the X-rays. You actually can't look at X-rays, right? So it's semantics, but it's also kind of important. Okay, so when you go out, and if you own your own practice someday, and you select, you got to buy an X-ray machine, you're going to go out and you're going to shop around, you're going to listen to all these vendors, and X-ray machines are pretty much like any other thing that you can purchase. They're not super expensive anymore, but they're not cheap either. And just like if you're going to go out and you're going to buy a car, or you're going to buy a dishwasher or anything else, you tend to get what you pay for. And if you go out and you buy the cheapest X-ray machine that's out there, or close to the cheapest X-ray machine, there's usually a reason why. It's scaled down. The image quality may not be good. You may not be able to do things like measure things on the X-ray and stuff like that. And so you tend to get what you pay for. You kind of generally want to buy, you don't have to buy the most expensive setup you can get, but you want to buy the most powerful machine that you can afford. And the machines will come different, have different ratings. And you want to buy the most powerful generator of the machine that you can afford. And the reason being is, when you set up the machine to take the X-rays, you always want to use the shortest exposure time. It's like a camera. So you use the shortest exposure time that you possibly can. And the reason for that is you minimize motion artifact. And because of that short exposure time, you want to use the highest power of the machine that you can. Otherwise, you're going to have a real hard time penetrating through a great big dog belly or something like that. So the more punchy or the more powerful the machine that you can get, the better. It will allow you to get better radiographs, especially on big animals. Okay. Also, you want to consider some of the electrical requirements when you go buy a machine. You want to ask questions like, what kind of plug do I need to plug it into? Does it go into a normal standard wall outlet, or do I need to put 220 volts in there, or do I need to put 3-phase power in? So you want to make sure that you think of all those things ahead of time, which the vendors will typically help you do that. You also want to ask about the warranty of the machine. It's a machine, and some things are going to break over time. And so what's the warranty? If the warranty is only 1 year, can you buy an extended warranty to keep it in warranty longer? Do they come out and do preventive maintenance on that machine, make sure it stays like new and things like that? So just a few things. So inside the X-ray tube, there's different parts inside the X-ray tube, and this lists some of the parts and some of the definitions that we probably need to know. One part of the X-ray tube is called the target, and that is actually where the X-rays. Yeah. Hello. Are y'all
sorry
there?
Your internet is a little spotty, so you're coming in and out when you're talking.
Well, that just sucks.
Yeah, we're all here. Your internet is it's a little bit spotty, so you like I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's not good, but I don't know what I can do about it. I'm at a hotel. So
I'm just letting you know. So you'll cut
okay.
in and out. So
Well, here's the good news is I, I, I'm recording it. And so if you miss some of it, you can probably go back because I think the recording of it will probably be fine because it's recorded here locally on my computer. So, and I will send you that when we get done. So I guess we, at least for now, we have to deal with it, if that's okay. So anyway, the X-ray definitions, the anode is a little part inside the X-ray tube where the X-rays are actually produced. And some people will call it the target, and you'll see why here in a minute. The cathode is also inside the X-ray tube, and it's a little coiled filament made of a metal wire made out of this metal called rhenium, actually. And it heats up really, really hot, and it makes electrons that end up flying towards and hitting the target, and that's what makes X-rays. You'll see that here in a minute too. There's different settings on every X-ray machine that you can look at and adjust. There's one called KVP, which stands for kilovolts potential. So that is when you turn it up, you're increasing the power or the penetrability of the X-rays to be able to go through the body. Okay. The MA and the S is, MA stands for milliamperage, and that controls the number, again, the power of X-rays that you can have. And the seconds is the exposure time. And again, you always want to minimize the exposure time. And that will minimize possible movement artifact. As far as other things in there, the focal spot, we're gonna talk about here in a minute. It's part of the anode. And then the other thing, this line voltage compensator, I wouldn't worry about that. That's to, if you are in an area and the electricity coming out of the wall isn't stable, it kind of fluctuates up and down. This will help balance that out. And we had talked yesterday a little bit about primary radiation and scatter radiation. And so primary radiation is, again, inside the collimated portion that you actually get the picture out of that you will make a diagnosis from. And the scatter radiation is that low level radiation that's actually produced inside the animal by the patient itself as the X-rays pass through the animal. So let's look at a cartoon or a picture here of a X-ray tube. And so what happens in this X-ray tube, this whole thing, it's like a great big light bulb with thick glass around it. And on one side of the light bulb, we have this thing called a cathode, and it has basically a 10 volts charge, and it's negatively charged. So pretty low level voltage. And it's attached with these wires to this, again, this thing called the filament. And if you look at an old kind of light bulb, old timey light bulb, it has a little coiled wire inside of it that glows and gets bright, yellow or whatever, bright white light. And the filament inside the X-ray tube is basically the same thing. So when we turn the electricity on here, that filament is going to get really hot physically, and it starts to glow. And when it does that, it reaches a certain temperature that it will actually boil off electrons that will form a cloud, an electron cloud that kind of hangs around the filament. So it forms all this electrons that sit around the filament in this cloud around it. Then there's this great big glass tube, and inside the glass tube is nothing, literally nothing. It's not even air in there. It's an evacuated tube. So they've actually sucked out all of the air, and this tube is in a vacuum. Okay, so the electrons are made in this filament when it's turned on. On this side of this evacuated tube, you have the anode or the target. And that target is, again, made out of a metal. And what happens this side is positively charged big time, 100,000 plus volts positive charge on the anode side. And so you can imagine that if I have electrons that are produced from the filament, then they are forming this cloud. And if I turn this positive side on, now these negatively charged electrons are going to be attracted and want to fly over literally to this target, which is what happens. And so these electrons end up going over here, and they fly over towards the target, and they hit the target with tremendous energy and great velocity. And when they hit the target, it generally makes X-rays. It makes an X-ray in this method called Bremsstrahlung, which is a German word going back from, I guess, when they discovered X-rays, which Bremsstrahlung radiation means it's physically breaking radiation, as breaking as in not breaking like this, but coming to a halt. So these electrons fly with tremendous velocity. They hit the target or the anode, and they are immediately stopped. And so they go from super high velocity into no velocity at all. That kinetic energy has to be converted into something. So normally 99% of that is converted into heat. So this anode heats up as all those electrons hit it, but 1% of that energy is converted into X-rays, X-ray energy. So that's generally how every X-ray is made, even still, in every X-ray tube and every X-ray machine. So it's due to this Bremsstrahlung radiation, which again stands for breaking radiation. Okay. So here's a real diagram of an X-ray tube, just to give you an idea. So this is a rotor, and if you've all been in shot X-rays, typically most of the buttons for X-rays, you'll have different stages on the button. You press it first, and you press the little button to make the exposure about halfway down. And this rotor, you can actually hear it. This rotor, this thing in here, will start to spin around real fast. And on that rotor, you have a target. Okay, and it spins around super fast, and you can actually hear it when you press that first button, that stage button on the X-ray exposure machine. Okay, then once you click it all the way, then what happens then is that's when it applies the positive charge over here, and those electrons then can fly from the filament across this gap, and they hit the target and strike the target and create X-rays. Okay, and they do that through this German word called Bremsstrahlung radiation. Sorry, I have a bird behind me now. Okay. So X-rays are generated by the anode, and they are generated in every direction possible. So when they come, they produce right in here by this target of the anode, and they fly off in this way and this way and every which way. But this entire glass X-ray tube is encased by this lead-lined head on the X-ray machine right in here. So every X-ray that's produced by the X-ray tube that goes off in any direction other than what is allowed to go out this way gets soaked up or gets suppressed by the lead shielding around the X-ray tube. Okay, so there's a little window in this area right down the bottom here where the X-rays are allowed to come out. So that's probably a little piece of glass in there, and the X-rays can come through the glass. But if they come out in every other direction, they should be stopped by the X-ray tube and the X-ray housing around it. Okay. So again, we talked a little bit about these terms. The MAS stands for milliamperes. It controls the number of X-rays that come out of the X-ray tube. So when you turn up the knob on your X-ray machine that says MA or MAS, you turn it up, you're going to increase the number of X-rays that are physically produced by the X-ray tube on each exposure. So MAS controls the power of the X-ray tube by increasing the number of X-rays. Okay. The other knob on your X-ray machine that you'll fill with all the time is called the KVP knob, and that stands for kilovolts potential. And the KVP knob doesn't control the number of X-rays, but it controls how those X-rays, how they can penetrate through things. So if you turn up the KVP, the X-rays become more penetrable. So they now will have easier ways to get through a large dog, a large abdomen of a dog. So if you have a dog that's a St. Bernard, 200-pound, and you're trying to take X-rays of its belly, you're going to have to turn the KVP way up so it can penetrate through that amount of soft tissue. If you're X-raying a cat abdomen, you can get away with using much less KVP. Okay, and you always want to use the least amount of KVP and the least amount of MA that you can use for every exposure for radiation safety purposes. Okay. Okay, then we talked about the X-ray tube and Bremsstrahlung X-ray production. And as the X-rays are produced, they escape the tube and they go down into this thing, which is called a beam restricting device. And again, the other name for it is a collimator. And if you have shot X-rays, on the top of the tube, there's two little knobs typically, and you'll twist one of them and you twist the other one, and it will make the useful beam different size. So one controls vertical, one controls horizontal. And by using those two knobs, you can adjust the size of the primary beam or the useful beam that's coming out. And typically they'll have a light bulb in here with a mirror. And so the light bulb will show you a light on how big that square is going to be. Okay. And then the other thing you want to keep in mind, and this is a lot of people, I think, mess this up, is back in the old days, we would have different sizes of cassettes and when we had regular film. And so we would have, you know, an 8x10 cassette that you could put a little cat chest on. And then we'd have a 14x17 inch cassette that you would use for big dogs. Okay. And you always want to adjust the beam restricting device of the collimator. You want to adjust that always not to the size of the cassette or the DR plate. You want to adjust it to the body part that you're actually imaging. Okay. So if you're wanting to shoot a picture of a cat's thorax, you know, that image probably needs to be maybe 10 inches long and 5 inches wide is when you adjust it for. If you need to adjust it for a 55-pound dog abdomen, then you're going to open it real big. So if you're going to adjust it for the carcass of a cat, you're going to make it maybe an inch around. So you always want to adjust it for the size of whatever body part you're trying to image. So there's a picture of the light and the collimator. And again, by twiddling those knobs at the top, you can adjust the size of that rectangle or square. Okay, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, of formation of scatter radiation. So here's our primary X-ray coming out of our X-ray tube up in here, and it comes out, and as the further out it gets, it starts to diverge away, just like light would from a flashlight, okay? And the X-rays in the primary beam, they go in through the patient. They interact with all of the stuff inside the patient, so all the soft tissues and the bones and whatever it goes through, okay? And other low-level X-rays are produced actually inside the patient. That's called scatter radiation, okay? And again, that's the part that when you don't wear your lead gloves, that's the part that gets you into trouble radiation safety-wise. It's not generally the primary beam because hopefully, except for that X-ray I showed you yesterday, most people are smart enough to keep their hands out of the primary beam, okay? So scatter radiation is a big deal. And again, there's a picture of that image I show you. So they're being exposed by scatter radiation coming from the patient, not by primary beam radiation that comes from the X-ray tube. Okay, the other thing that I should talk about real quick is there's a thing called a grid, and most of the X-ray tables will have the grid built in, and it's typically under the tabletop. It's a little sheet of metal, and just real quickly, the function of the grid is it will help to minimize scatter radiation that hits the cassette or the DR plate. If you have all that scatter radiation that's being formed, the same radiation that would increase the exposure to your hands will also degrade the image quality because of the scatter radiation, low-level radiation that will also degrade the image. So you get an image that's not very pretty. If you could get away and kind of clean up, if you will, the scatter radiation, then the image quality, the radiograph is actually going to be much prettier than if not. Okay. And the grid is the thing, again, it's built into the table. You won't ever see it unless you start taking your table apart. But the grid functions to clean up and improve the image quality by cleaning up scatter radiation. That's all you probably need to know about that. This tray back in the old days, this was a cassette, and this is called a Bucky tray, and you would pull it out, and there's still, you know, some clinics that still use film cassettes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you would pull this tray out, you stick the cassette in, you stick it back in underneath the tabletop. If you have digital X-ray, which most people do now, they will have a DR flat panel for the most part. And the DR flat panel is basically the same size as this cassette. And you would put it in the Bucky tray and you just stick it in under the table and you leave it. You never take it out. It just sits there all the time. Okay. But that tray, the real name for it is a Bucky tray. It's named after a Dr. Bucky, believe it or not. Okay, again, there's the function of the grid. You don't need to get into that. All I want you to know is a grid will help clean up scatter radiation, which helps improve the picture quality. Okay, forget about that one. Okay, now that we talked a little bit about how X-rays are produced and real basics on film screen, let's talk a little bit more about digital X-ray. Now, digital X-rays came in veterinary medicine came about probably 10 to 12 years ago when people started buying digital X-ray devices. And you have to be real careful when you understand it. There is no such thing as a digital X-ray. The X-rays are produced by an X-ray tube, just like we got through talking about in every X-ray machine there is. Okay, and it's not like now we have digital numbers flying out of the X-ray tube. Okay, it's still analog X-rays that come out of the X-ray tube. So there really is no such thing as a digital X-ray machine. Okay, but there's digital X-ray systems that we'll talk about. So a digital x-ray is different than a conventional x-ray because, back in the old days, and again, some people still have it, you have a cassette, you actually have a piece of film that you could hold in your hand, and you would put it up on this view box, this light box under the clips, and you'd hang it under the view box and look at it. Okay. The digital x-ray is nice because you don't have to do that. The digital x-rays just show up on a computer screen. And so because of that, there's lots of advantage to digital x-rays. You don't lose them unless your hard drive crashes. So, but hopefully you back that up. You can send them electronically out to other people and things like that. So lots of advantages to digital x-rays versus analog x-rays. So the other advantage to most digital x-rays, and I say most and I'll tell you why in a minute, is that the image quality for most digital x-rays is so much better than it is for analog films. Okay. And the real cool thing about it is that, when you were shooting analog films with film screen, you had to measure the thickness of the dog and see if, he's 12 centimeters thick, and you'd look up on a chart, you'd adjust the KVP and the MAS for a 12 centimeter body part, and then you'd hope that you would get a nice film. Okay. But it was very difficult to get good films all the time. It was kind of like magical. Sometimes it seems like some days it worked and you got great films, and some days they just sucked, and it just the way it was. Okay. So, but the nice thing about digital x-rays, if you have a good digital system, it makes it really easy to get nice films every time. Okay. So, and because of that, we can also see so much more, which makes it more diagnostic. So here's a x-ray of a analog film type x-ray of a dog's shoulder. And you can see there's some little osteophytes, which we'll learn about on the caudal aspect of his shoulder. This is a film screen image, and you can see the shoulder. But the thing that you can't see is down at the bottom of the screen is where the elbow should be. But that's almost pure black. You can't see it. And that's because that body part is much thinner than up around the shoulder, which is much thicker. And so we'd have to reshoot another x-ray using a different technique to be able to see the elbow. Now, with digital x-rays, it's a little bit different because now, the exposure is so much better and the images quality. If I take that same film and I do it with the digital x-ray machine, then that's what you end up getting. Okay, same shoulder exactly. And so now we can see the entire thing. We can see the shoulder even better than we did before, but now we can see the entire limb. We can see the elbow and the radius and ulna. And there's a kind of a black area or a lucent area in this part of the humerus that turned out to be a bone cancer that's in there, which we'll talk about coming up. And so the digital x-rays is a lot better. They show you a lot more detail with good digital x-ray machines. So here's just to give you an idea. This is a test that Dr. Pachowski did years ago. She's a radiologist out in California, and this was a cadaver horse leg. So this is the carcass of a horse, and this was with analog type film, right? And what she did is she adjusted the technique. So had the MAS set at 0.32 for this X-ray, and then she doubled it to 0.64. And then doubled it again here to 1.25, doubled it again to 2.5, 5, and 10. And you can see as you double and turn up the MAS, the film gets darker and blacker because we're using now more x-rays, okay? So we tend to burn out the film as we increase the MAS, okay? And so the question is, well, which one of these is the best quality film, okay? And if I was looking at it, I would think that it's probably this one here that I can see some soft tissues and I can see some bone. So this one's probably the winner of all of those. Okay, this one's a little light. This one's way too light. These are too black. Okay, so that's the nice one. Now let's do the same thing with the same techniques of the same horse cadaver leg with digital x-rays. When I do that, here's the same thing, the same images. So with digital x-rays, now I would ask you the same thing. Which one's the best one? Okay. Hopefully, if you can hear me, can you kind of hear me? Yeah, kind of. Okay. Now, which one's the best one? Well, they all look the same, don't they? And so with digital x-rays, the bottom line here is it's very technique forgiving. Okay. With the old film screen, you had to be spot on your technique to get good films. With digital x-rays, if you have a good digital system, you could have a monkey go up and set up your x-ray machine and you would get a decent quality image for the most part. Okay, so they're all the same. Now, so the key is for radiation safety wise though, do you think it would be better to always shoot the x-rays at 10 MAS or at 0.32 MAS? And the answer is, for radiation safety wise, you want to use the lowest amount of technique, the lowest amount of energy, X-ray energy that you can get away with and still get a good film. And so radiation safety wise, we would want to shoot everything at 0.32. So why not? Well, there's a reason why not. And let's look at that. If you use low exposure for everything, here's what you're going to get. So we zoomed up. Now we electronically magnified the images of this horse carpus. So over here on this side, this one's at 0.32. Here's the radiocarpal bone. Here's the distal end of the radius, 1.25 and 10. And what's the difference between these? They're all kind of the same shade, but if you look at the detail, this one's super grainy. Okay, this one's kind of grainy, and this one you can start to see little linear areas of the trabecular bone. So the image quality is much better. And if we blow it up even more, it becomes even more apparent. Okay, so all you have to do to one bottom line thing I want you to get across is, when you're going to evaluate digital X-ray systems, zoom the images up, magnify them on the screen, because that's one way to tell good quality machines from poor quality machines. Okay, so if we have an X-ray that's at 0.32, there's just not enough X-rays there to give us a lot of good data. Okay, and that's why the films, if you start to blow them up, they become pixelated, just like any other digital camera picture would be if you start to zoom them up. Okay, so the bottom line thing, and this took me a long time to realize, is that with old film screen, when I would turn up the KVP and the MAS knobs, it made the films blacker. Okay, with digital systems, for the most part, that's not the case. If you turn it up, those two knobs up, the KVP and the MAS, with digital systems, it doesn't make the film blacker, it makes it better quality. So it makes it less grainy when you turn up the technique. And so there's some fine line in there. There's some balancing act that, for radiation safety purposes, we want to use the lowest technique we can, but image quality purposes, we want to use enough technique to where we have good image quality. Okay. Okay, there's different types of digital X-ray systems that are out there. Luckily, some of them have already gone by the wayside because they didn't work very well and they gave poor image quality, and people stopped buying them. So then people stopped selling them. So the main ones you're going to see now are called CR systems and DR systems. So these two are the main ones that you're going to see. Some of the old type things were these hybrid systems. So basically it was a digital camera on a stick, you'd put an X-ray on the view box, you can take a picture of it with a camera, things like that. That's not a real digital X-ray. That's a digitized X-ray, but not a digital X-ray. So we're going to concentrate again on CR, or computed radiography, and DR, which is digital radiography. Okay, I'm not going to worry about those. Oh, this is kind of funny. He said back in the old days, when people started trying to do digital, they would take pictures of them and send them to me. And this is typically what I would get. So they would put an X-ray up on a view box and take a picture and send it to me. And then they get pissed off because I'm saying, I can't read that. It's crap. I can't read that. And we had to get through that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's hopefully those days are kind of gone. Here's another winner. So, I can't tell you anything about this dog's leg. I can't even see his heart really. So just crappy images. This one here, they decided they needed to use a flash on it, and so that's just a reflection of the flash bulb going off when they were trying to take this picture, which is kind of crazy. So it just crap stuff. So CR systems, you always know you'll have a CR system because you still have to take out the cassette each time and load it into the Bucky tray, and then you shoot the image. You take it back out of the Bucky tray, you take your cassette over to this film reader, and you stick the cassette into this film reader, and it takes out this phosphor layer inside of it and magically recreates an image and puts it on a computer. Okay, but CR systems have a cassette, they get wear and tear, the image quality is usually not as good, and they're not as technique friendly. And so CR systems are better than analog, but they're not as good as digital systems, digital X-ray systems. And so that's basically all I want to know. We'll just go through it real quick. So CR systems, again, you shoot an X-ray, it goes through the patient, hits this detector over here. You take the detector out. You don't need to know any of that crap. You take the detector out and you put it in the reader. It shines a laser beam on it and puts an image 60 to 90 seconds later up on your computer, and you can look at it. And then you go get another view. So it takes a long time. So to get one view, it may take 60 seconds or a minute. to get the view that shows up on your computer screen. Okay, DR systems are much better. Now you have to be real careful when you go out and you shop for x-ray tubes and x-ray systems also, because there are a lot of unscrupulous vendors that have booze at meetings. And so I think right now VMX is going on in Orlando, Florida, and coming up this in September is WVC out in Las Vegas, and all those big meetings have big exhibit halls, and vendors come in, and their whole goal is to sell you something. Okay, so all the salesmen come, and they all get paid by commission, and so they want to sell you something. They want to sell you a box. They don't care. And truthfully, for the most part, they don't care how they sell it to you, as long as you buy something. That's what they want. And so they're going to have products that they're going to show you, and a lot of them aren't really knowledgeable about their products, and they as long as they sell you something, they don't really care. Okay, and so you have to be really careful of that, because some of the stuff that they tend to sell is crap, and so you have to be really careful about that. So the best way to shop for an x-ray system probably is get advice from a radiologist like me or Dr. Ward or anybody else that that may be in your area, and say, hey, have you do you see images, you read images from this Fuji x-ray system, and if so, are they good? Okay, that's probably the best one way to shop for them. So some of the crappy DR systems are CCD based systems, and CCD is an acronym that stands for charge coupled device. Basically, it is an x-ray system that is built around and powered by a digital camera, just like in your phone. Okay, and the CCD chip is a chip about the size of a postage stamp. That's a light detecting chip that will make a picture and transmit it digitally and make the computer show the picture up on a computer. Okay, and so CCD based x-ray systems have a camera that's fixed at a certain length depth under the table, and as soon as that x-ray makes this phosphor plate flash in light, it takes a picture of it and shoots that picture over to a computer system. The image quality for CCD based systems is horrible. You have to turn the KVP and the MS way up, so radiation safety, it's bad, and the image quality even at that is really bad. And so these CCD based systems are going to the wayside. There's not many companies that sell them anymore. They tend to break really quickly. The people used to buy them because they were marketed as DR type systems, and they were cheap, and people fell for that and they bought it. Okay. The real kind of DR system, that is the kind that you should always want to have, is what's called a flat panel DR system. And this is where you're going to buy a plate that's going to be fixed underneath the x-ray table. That's a DR plate. And some of the best ones are made by Canon. Fuji makes some, Samsung makes some. There's different ones, and some of them are better than others. And so you always want to, again, the best way is get advice from your friendly neighborhood radiologist when you get ready to drop 30 grand on one of these things. Okay, I don't care about that. I don't care about that. I don't care about that. So this is a picture of a DR plate. Okay, so it's a big plate. It's got a fancy electronics inside of it. And the cool thing about the DR plate is once I expose that patient and I press the button for the exposure, instead of having to wait 30 or 60 or 90 seconds for that image to show up on the computer screen with DR systems, it shows up like in 2 to 3 seconds. So it's really quick. And so you can actually take the picture and you can wait 2 or 3 seconds. And if the computer's in your x-ray room, you can evaluate it and say, is that dog crooked? Or does the exposure look bad or whatever? And if it does, you can just delete it and retake it right away, which saves a lot of time. Okay, again, the display from DR systems is really quick, which is really nice. We don't care about that. I don't really care about that. I don't really care about that. There's other ways that if you go to and you shop around for digital x-ray systems and flat panel detectors, some of the salesmen, they will learn key jargon and try to confuse you with it and make you think that they're smart, okay, which usually they're not. So they'll start thinking, well, yeah, my system has a higher DQF and the modulation transfer function is better than, Joe Blow's system 2 boosts down. And, we can do these phantoms like this here, and we can measure line pairs and where you can't resolve them between individual lines, down in here versus here. The bottom line is if they start talking DQEs and MTFs and line pairs and phantoms and stuff like that, you probably need to walk away. And again, the first thing that I would do is do what we just talked about earlier. The easiest, quickest thing to do is blow the images up. And so if you're looking at Joe Blow for an X-ray system, you go up to his computer in the booth and you start magnifying the X-ray of that cat head, okay? And you see, does it start to fall apart and become pixelated and look like crap after 2 or 3 clicks that you try to zoom it up, or does it hold together? That's one of the best ways to evaluate a digital X-ray system, okay? And it's easy, and you don't have to worry about all this other crap. So again, here's a dog's paw. And again, one of the best ways you want to do is evaluate it is blow it up. So you make that paw become bigger and it goes to this, and then that could even go to that. And if it blows it up and it still stays good quality, then that's probably a good quality X-ray machine. Okay. Real quickly too, let's see what time is it here. Real quickly, we want to evaluate other things, with analog X-ray machines, basically you had film and you had screens and you had the X-ray machine, and that was it. But with digital, now we have this whole nother world of stuff that besides the X-ray machine we have to worry about, and besides the flat panel detector, then we have to worry about the software that we store the images on, the type of computers to use and stuff like that. And y'all grew up in a whole different time than I did. And so everybody's very computer savvy with you guys. So this will probably be real easy for y'all to understand. So you have to evaluate not just the X-ray system, but you have to evaluate the software that comes with it. Is it user-friendly? Does it take 30 clicks to get an exposure, or does it take 3 clicks to get an exposure? Things like that. There's some new artifacts that we have to worry about that we're not going to worry about with digital artifacts. And some of the things that will separate the cheaper digital X-ray systems from the more expensive ones are really nice things that happen automatically behind the scenes that a lot of times you don't even realize. And so if some of the cheaper machines, if I have a cat's paw and it's really small image like this size, the good systems will actually crop that down and only show you that part of the primary beam on your computer. The cheap ones won't. And so you have this big white area around what you're trying to see, which will degrade image quality also. So some of the good machines will do auto stuff for you, where the other machines won't. The other thing that we have to talk about is this new word here called DICOM. Anybody heard of DICOM? Raise your hand. Yeah, DICOM is super important, and you got to make sure that whatever machine you're buying is totally DICOM compliant, because DICOM is the way that images are sent out and transmitted around the world. And it's, in veterinary medicine and human medicine. So DICOM is very important. Okay, so image manipulation and processing. Image processing is done by the computer before you even see the image on the screen. So the image processing is what the computer does with that image to make it look pretty in that 2 or 3 seconds before it shows up on your computer monitor. Okay, you don't know it's doing it, but it all happens real quick inside the computer, and it takes that digital information and it analyzes it, and it says, let's make this the prettiest picture we can, and that's called image processing. Okay, image manipulation is different. Image manipulation is what you do with the image once it's already on the computer. So you can rotate it right, left, you can rotate it, you can flip it, you can flip it horizontally or vertically. There's lots of stuff you can do it. You can move your mouse around and make it lighter or darker, but that's image manipulation, not image processing, the stuff you do to it. So again, here's a digital image. That's an analog image, and now we can see up here in this whole analog image, we can see here's the lumbar spine, the lumbosacral region. But again, can I see anything down here in the stifles? Not really. But if I have a digital image, then you can. If the digital image will make it look like that. Okay, so with good digital systems, now I can see everything. So there's not any part of that picture that I can't see. Okay, that's what you want, obviously. Okay, so let's see if let me talk about that. Oh, again, I kind of started to talk about this too. Not all DR systems are created equal. So if you go to buy an X-ray system, you know, just because they say it's a DR flat panel doesn't mean they're all going to be really good. So there's some, again, that are not very good and some that are super good. And typically the ones that aren't very good are lower in price. And again, it comes down to that same old thing. You tend to get what you pay for. Okay, so this is what did this. These are images that were obtained from a DR system, but this is one of those CCD based crap that you don't want to buy. And so you always want to, if you're going to ask the salesman, you want to say, is this a CCD based system? Okay, and you can look at they'll give you the specs, and somewhere in there it's going to say detector type, and the acronym CCD is going to be in there. If it says CCD, I wouldn't buy it. Okay, so this is a bad image. I mean, I wouldn't be very happy if I spent 20 grand on this system and I got stuff like that, right? I wouldn't be very happy if I spent 20 grand on this one and I got images that look like that. Okay, but people do, and they regret it, but they do all the time because they get talked into it by some vendor that is, you know, the sales guy at a meeting. So again, horrible image quality with these CCD based systems. That's all you need to know. Okay, PACS and DICOM. A PACS system is a acronym that stands for Picture Archival and Communication System, and medically, that's how all medical images are stored and cataloged on your computer. So inside of your computer, you'll have basically a mini PACS, and you know that way you can go in and you can type in fluffy, and you can type in pelvis, and you can pull up the dates of every fluffy that you did pelvis on, because it can search and catalog all of the images that you have. Okay, and then if you have ultrasound in your clinic, you're going to store all the ultrasound images on your same PACS, and that way. And then if you have CT in your clinic, or you have a CT that's done elsewhere and they send a copy of it to your clinic, you can store fluffy CT. And so that way, if you type in, you know, on your PACS, I want to see all the images that were from day one on Fluffy Jones, it's going to pull up every image from every date, whether it is a ultrasound or a CT or what, it's going to pull it up and show it to you for that animal. So that's what a PACS system does. So it replaces hard copy films. It's a software system that catalogs and allows you to retrieve and look at different medical images from a patient. So all of the software now is going to come with PACS. And again, that's one of those things that there's good PACS systems. There's some that's basically a picture viewer that you can look at x-rays and they won't show ultrasound at all. They won't show any video clips with ultrasound. They won't know how to do it. Did I lose everybody? Did I lose everybody? I did. Okay. Well, crap. Let's try this again. Jeez. I'm going to try to find a better spot during the break. Okay, so we talked about the PACS. Can you hear me now a little bit? Okay, sorry. So we talked about the PACS, and that's how you're going to store your images and catalog them and find them. And then the other thing that you have to talk about is DICOM. And what DICOM is it takes those stored images and it allows you to send them electronically to anybody else in the world. Okay, and so you're thinking, well, what's so magical about that? Well, the thing is you know, you can email a JPEG image to anybody, okay, and they get the image, but it doesn't have the data behind the image. It doesn't have all the metadata. So it doesn't tell you the patient's name. It doesn't tell you their age. It doesn't tell you the date the picture was taken. It doesn't tell you the type of x-ray system it was taken. Well, DICOM sends to one place to another, not only all of the images in high quality resolution form, but it takes all of the metadata, which are called DICOM tags, and that includes everything about that exposure and about that patient. So the DICOM tags include things like the last name of the patient, the pet's name, the age, the sex, the modality of the machine, the brand of the machine, the date it was acquired, the time it was acquired, the date it was last manipulated. So DICOM sends all of that information along with each image to another separate facility. And that's what we deal with as in my company, as far as teleradiology. People DICOM their images to our DICOM server, and all of this information comes with it. And so I know for sure I'm reading Fluffy's images and not somebody else that's not Fluffy. Okay, so DICOM is a method to send digital images, and the DICOM, it's kind of funny. The acronym stands for Digital Image Communication in Medicine. Now you think that's really not right because it would be DICOM, but I think they figured out they can't call it DICOM, and so they had to call it DICOM, right? And so it's DICOM. Okay, you don't really need to know any of that. Disaster recovery, the thing I would tell you about disaster recovery is you got to, just like anything else, hard drives, it's not a matter of time if they'll crash, it's when they will crash. And so you want to make sure always and archive your medical records and archive your images. So the best way is archive them not in your hospital, like to a cloud type system, and archive them there. And that way, if something happens to your computer, you can always get all of your medical records and your image data back. Okay. And then we'll end up with this. Okay, so again, now we've done the most boring parts of radiology, and we're going to start with something new coming up here in a minute. I think we're going to start with neuro stuff. But I'm biased on why is radiology the best. I'm a little bit biased here. Obviously because I'm a radiologist, so that allows me to do that. Okay, but why is radiology the best? Are y'all too young to know what this movie is? Have y'all seen this movie? Yeah? No? Some of you? Okay, well, it was this Indiana Jones. He was a really cool dude in this movie. If you haven't seen it, you should. And so we know how to celebrate when we're right. You know, radiologists make the diagnosis, okay, typically. And so when we're right, we know how to celebrate. Then again, when we're wrong, we still celebrate when we're wrong, right? And so sometimes we have to deal with snakes. And you'll learn as you go forward, a lot of board certified surgeons don't have the best attitudes, but they have really high egos. And so a lot of similarities there with that. We know how to the right tool for the job. So if we want to diagnose a certain condition, we know we need to use either ultrasound or CT, but x-rays aren't going to work, or vice versa. So we can figure all that kind of stuff out. We have cool tools. I mean, you could be know nothing about an ultrasound machine, turn the lights off in the room, turn the machine on, you have all these bells and whistles and lights on the machine, and you sit in front of it in the warm glow, and it just makes you look smart, right? And so that's kind of cool. So we have good tools. Some of the tools are better than others. We just talked about that. You tend to get what you pay for when you're buying imaging equipment. We get rewarded when we're right. And bottom line is the radiologists tend to make the diagnosis. And so get to know your friendly neighborhood radiologists when you get out, because they're going to help you out in practice quite a bit. Okay, so that's it for this part. Sorry about the glitches. I'm going to try to find a better place that has a little bit more stable internet after our break. So let's take about, let's come back in about 15 minutes, take a break, and then we'll come back and we're going to start up on our next subject. Is that okay? Sounds good. See you in a few minutes.